Dr. Sarah Chun had survived 3 alien worlds, 2 diplomatic disasters, and one particularly memorable incident involving fermented Zelkari fruit juice. She figured the research station on Korath Prime would be different. Quieter. She was wrong. The Korathi were apex predators in every sense of the word. 8 feet of muscle, bone, and scales that could tear through reinforced steel. Their homeworld was a death trap of carnivorous flora and fauna that made Earth's most dangerous creatures look like house cats. The Galactic Council had classified them as a Level 7 threat species, meaning contact was restricted to essential diplomatic and scientific exchanges only. Sarah was here because she was supposedly the best xenobiologist in human space. The truth was simpler. She was the only one crazy enough to volunteer. The research station perched on a cliff overlooking the Korathi capital city of Thekmor. Massive stone structures jutted from the landscape like teeth, connected by bridges that spanned chasms deep enough to swallow skyscrapers. The architecture was brutal, functional, and completely alien to human sensibilities. Remember, Dr. Chun, Ambassador Welkins had said during the briefing, his face pale with worry, maintain distance at all times. Do not make direct eye contact. Do not show your teeth. And whatever you do, never touch a Korathi without explicit permission. They consider unsolicited physical contact an act of aggression. Sarah nodded along, knowing she would probably break half those rules within a week. It was her way. The station's main laboratory was a marvel of human engineering wrapped in Korathi defensive architecture. Thick walls, narrow windows, and security systems that could lock down faster than a human heartbeat. Sarah had been studying tissue samples and behavioral recordings for 3 weeks, making notes about Korathi social structures, hunting patterns, and surprisingly complex emotional displays. The breakthrough came when she realized that Korathi pack dynamics weren't based on dominance hierarchies like most species assumed. They were based on contribution value. The strongest hunter didn't lead the pack. The most useful member did. It was a distinction that had eluded every previous researcher, and Sarah felt the familiar thrill of discovery. She was deep in her analysis when the emergency klaxon started wailing. The station's AI spoke in calm, measured tones that somehow made everything worse. Security breach detected. Multiple Korathi life signs approaching research level. All personnel report to designated safe rooms immediately. Sarah looked up from her microscope, frowning. The research level was supposed to be sealed. How had they gotten past the security barriers? Through the reinforced window of her lab, she could see the main corridor. 3 adult Korathi moved with predatory grace, their scaled hides gleaming under the artificial lights. Each one was massive, easily capable of reducing the station to scrap metal if they wanted to. But they weren't attacking the walls or equipment. They were searching for something. The largest Korathi, a female with distinctive silver markings along her jaw, called out in their language. The translation system kicked in a moment later. Where's the small one? Where did it go? Sarah's blood went cold. A small one. That meant a cub. Korathi cubs were notoriously curious and incredibly dangerous. Their claws could slice through most materials. They had no concept of personal safety, and they possessed the boundless energy that made young of any species a handful. A Korathi cub loose on a human research station was everyone's worst nightmare. The search party moved past her lab, their heavy footsteps echoing through the corridors. Sarah waited until they were out of sight, then made a decision that her survival training definitely hadn't covered. She left the lab. The corridors were eerily quiet except for the distant sound of the Korathi calling for their missing cub. Sarah moved carefully, her soft-soled shoes making almost no noise on the metal flooring. She had a theory about where a curious cub might go, and if she was right, everyone was about to have a very bad day. The observation deck was at the far end of the station, a semicircular room with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Korathi homeworld. It was also the most structurally vulnerable part of the station, with large sections of transparent aluminum that could theoretically be broken by a determined effort. Sarah found the cub there, pressed against the largest window, staring out at its home world with what could only be described as longing. It was smaller than she had expected, about the size of a large dog, but already showing the predatory build that would make it a terror when fully grown. Its scales were a deep brown with hints of green, and its eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably sentient. The cub noticed her approach and turned, tilting its head in a gesture that was surprisingly familiar. It made a soft chirping sound, nothing like the deep growls and roars of the adults. "Hey there, little one," Sarah said softly, crouching down to make herself less threatening. "You're a long way from home, aren't you?" The cub took a step toward her, then another. Sarah remained perfectly still, letting it approach at its own pace. This was either going to be the stupidest thing she had ever done, or the most important moment of human-Karathi relations. The cub stopped just within arm's reach, studying her with those bright, intelligent eyes. Then, without warning, it reached out with one small clawed hand and grabbed her lab coat sleeve. Sarah's heart stopped. Every protocol screamed at her to pull away, to put distance between herself and the dangerous predator. Instead, she looked down at the tiny claws gripping her sleeve and smiled. "You're just scared, aren't you?" she whispered. "Lost and scared and want to go home." The cub made another soft chirping sound and tugged gently at her sleeve. Not aggressively, not demandingly, but with the kind of hesitant insistence that any parent would recognize. It wanted her to follow. Sarah made another decision that would probably give Ambassador Welkins a heart attack. She tugged back, just as gently, just as playfully. The cub's reaction was immediate and electric. Its eyes widened, and it made a sound that could only be described as delighted. It tugged again, harder this time, and Sarah responded in kind. Within moments, they were engaged in what amounted to an interspecies game of tug-of-war. It was in this position, playing with a Karathi cub while the station's emergency klaxons wailed in the background, that the adult search party found them. The largest female, the one with silver markings, appeared in the doorway with the other two close behind. Sarah felt her blood freeze as three sets of predatory eyes fixed on her. The cub, oblivious to the tension, continued tugging at her sleeve and making happy chirping sounds. Sarah slowly raised her free hand in what she hoped was a non-threatening gesture. "I found your cub," she said, her voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances. It was looking out the window. The lead female took a step into the room, and Sarah could hear the whisper of claws against metal. The translation system rendered her next words with mechanical precision. "Release the youngling immediately." Sarah looked down at the cub, which had wrapped both its small hand around her sleeve and was now hanging from her arm like a scaly monkey. It looked up at her with complete trust, still making those soft chirping sounds. "I don't think it wants to let go," Sarah said honestly. The female's eyes narrowed, and Sarah realized she had approximately 30 seconds to live unless she figured out what was really happening here. The cub wasn't just playing. It was communicating something, and Sarah's xenobiology training finally kicked in. Pack bonding behaviors. Contribution value. The cub had been looking out the window with longing, not just curiosity, and now was refusing to let go of the first being that had shown it gentle interaction instead of fearful avoidance. "It's not lost," Sarah said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "It's been exiled." The silence that followed was deafening. The three adult Karathi stood motionless, and Sarah could practically feel the weight of their attention. The cub continued chirping softly, still gripping her sleeve. "Among Karathi," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger as the pieces fell into place, "cubs that cannot contribute to pack survival are abandoned. But this one isn't weak or deficient. It's different. It seeks connection instead of dominance, understanding instead of conquest." The lead female took another step forward, and her voice carried new weight when she spoke. "The human understands pack law. Understand that sometimes pack law is wrong," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "This cub has value. It has intelligence and curiosity and the capacity for interspecies communication that none of us thought possible. In human culture, we would call it gifted. The cub looked up at her again, and Sarah